to our guest. This week we asked the question about B2B marketing operations. And interestingly enough, when I asked this question, of all of the polls that I've done so far to date, this had, if not the highest, one of the highest in terms of number of people voting. We had 70 people weighing in. And Megan and I may agree to disagree on this one. It'll be interesting to see, the conversation here. But the question is, where would the reporting function of MOPS go into, marketing or other than marketing? And what prompted this question was one of my clients was asking me questions about the RevOps function and how to think about it and what they're hearing in terms of the industry. Now, personally, for me, I voted for marketing mainly because as a former CMO, it was a control thing. A control meaning I don't want to give up control of my reporting, of anything related to my systems, say, for example, marketing automation systems. I would be very uncomfortable giving that control up to another party where they may have different interests or slightly different takes of what's important to them. It may or may not necessarily align with me. So from a control perspective, I'm fully in the camp of keep it within marketing. But I think, Megan, you've got a different point of view on that. How are you thinking of things?
Yeah, so I'm one of the 16% that voted for other, but I did say why. And I actually just put a link to a blog I did, oh my goodness, back in June of 2019. That feels like a whole other lifetime. But on revenue operations and the CMO, game changer or game over? Because when we started talking about revenue operations in my previous life at Serious Decisions and Forrester, there was a lot of controversy and conflict, even within the analyst team on it, because you had some people in the CMO practice and in the marketing ops practice who, would fight to the death to say it has to be in marketing or we're going to be just nothing more than sales operations. And I think because they saw it happen in so many companies, that's what happened when you tried to bring together a revenue operations function, it ended up being sales operations and marketing got to report on leads. And that's not the way to look at it, in my view. I think, to me, though, the solution isn't to say, hey, it has to stay in marketing. It's saying organizations need to think differently about revenue operations, about the operational requirements of the functions that make up the revenue team: sales, marketing, customer, right? One could argue product there as well, but, for fun, we'll just keep it to those. But they need to share data. They often need to share technology. They need to share planning and goals and tools. They need to be on the same page. And if they're in the same function, you can acknowledge that you have shared objectives, but different lenses on how to get there and who should be doing what and how to measure what good looks like. As long as you're all kind of, working off the same data or the right sets of data and pulling towards the same goal. And actually, one of the ways that I've seen that be really successful is actually when marketing and the SDR team, like even as just like one connection point, can be operating really, really closely. So that's why, I thought it would be so great to have Lisa come and talk to us, because often the SDR function reports into marketing, right? But you've got this sort of operational underpinning, no matter where it is, of these functions that are super interdependent. And should be able to share goals and data and tools, but often don't. So I think it's really important to kind of go back and say, well, why are we worried about, marketing operations not reporting into marketing? And is the problem, sort of one of leadership and focus, or is it one of, sort of change management? Why can't these things come together? So anyhow, I was excited though, Lisa, for you to join us. Lisa is the founder of Impulsion Consulting, which is an amazing company. And Lisa's doing amazing work with a lot of companies to help them stand up their SDR functions. And I'll let her share a little bit about what she's been doing. But before we do that, maybe Lisa, you can comment on sort of how you see operations working and how it supports the SDR team when it goes well.
Yeah. Thanks, Megan. It's interesting. I voted in this and I voted marketing, but your point is so well taken, because as somebody who, I was an SDR leader at multiple companies, I always felt like the quarterback between teams. I was always the one who wanted to make sure I was aligned across CS, marketing, sales, all of it. Like we were a revenue team, and I'm kind of infamous for saying we're all on the same team. We have the same goal. We are revenue generators. So why don't we cross-functionally operate instead of, you can't be successful if you're trying to do things in silos. And I have that conversation with my clients all the time. So the operations team, I work so closely with marketing operations and sales operations. We'd often meet the three of us together and say, like here's the focus, here's where we are towards our goals. And often those teams are essential for feeding the SDRs, quality leads when we're looking at lead scoring matrices and how that making sure that we're filtering in the leads that are ICP for our product, for our business. We want to make sure that we're not on a threshold that's too high or too low, and evaluate that consistently as our product offering changes, our services change. So it's an ongoing conversation. And I think to your point about a revenue team, I have functioned like that before. At one of the companies I worked with, we had a CRO and all of us reported to him. And so it was, we were all accountable for our goals, and we were communicating as a team at least once a week. So we knew what everybody was working on, what their focus was. And I think dovetailing nicely into our ABM conversation, that was how we made it successful, was the communication and focus across and prioritization of tasks across all teams.
And I think it's having respect for what each of those components of the revenue team brings to the table. It's not trying to turn them into something else when you go to a RevOps view. It's trying to say, how do we optimize each of these as part of a whole? And I think that's what you're talking about. And yeah, I have to say, I know as a marketing leader, I think I probably learned the most when I sat next to the SDRs. Right?
Front lines, right? Like they're talking. Yeah, exactly. They're talking to the prospects. They're getting the feedback in real time. And the messaging, the response to the messaging is instant. So if our what we're saying on the phone is not resonating, and if that's something we've worked on with marketing, we need to be communicating that back. And I'd often work with our demand gen team to actually find out what they were running for ad copy and which like text was performing the best on the ad copy side of things, translate that into subject lines and other added to other scripts. And then we would do that kind of symbiotically, because if we were getting results measuring our subject line success, translate it over to marketing and say, hey, this seems to be getting a lot of attention. We're getting a lot of opens and replies to this subject line or this first line of our email. And yeah, working together to make sure that we're optimizing that as best we can and increasing those conversion rates as best we can.
In marketing, we talk a lot about personalization at scale, and the SDRs are on the firing line. It's I think the hardest job in planet Earth, quite frankly, because the rejection is high, and you just got to have a really, really thick skin. But on the personalization front, so if you're an SDR, you're really busy and you're trying to figure things out, what are you seeing in terms of trends there of being able to personalize messages when time is so short for an SDR? Or what do you advise companies to do there?
Yeah, great question. So this is often as we've been saying since I feel like the beginning of time, it's a happy medium between quality and quantity. And there's an equation, there's a balance. And, if you focus too much on the quantity side of things and not as much on the quality, it gets to a conversation of, anyone can make 1,000 calls a day. It's knowing what to say when someone answers. So if we're not saying something that resonates with the persona that answers the phone, then our conversion rates are going to suffer. So when it comes to research, I know that a lot of leaders can get frustrated that SDRs get bogged down in researching. But I think there's a way for us to find a happy medium there as well. If we can arm and enable our teams with persona-based messaging, industry-based messaging, based on the research, like consistently being updated, not just some document that's done in a grid once upon a time where we said, oh, here's our buyer and what they care about like 20 years ago. We want to make sure that we're constantly keeping up to date with what's happening in those industries, especially when you're doing an account-based marketing strategy and you've got an ICP or named account list. Okay, well, take the time, find out what is happening in those top account industries in real time. I mean, everyone's business objective changed last year when the pandemic hit. And we can't rely on information and research that we had built before that. Everyone's shifted and budgets tightened, and everything changed. We don't even have to talk about it because everybody knows we're living it. But one of the things that I think we can do, and marketing can help enable SDRs with this research component by looking at things that are happening in the industry, collecting that information, and almost like mapping it to, okay, industry, here's our buyer persona within these industries, here's what they care about, what they're measured on in their role, which is something that I actually advise people to look at job postings for, because often job postings across roles will talk about KPIs. So what do they care about? And what's our message that correlates to those things and solves problems that they're going to see in their role, or helps them to achieve the KPIs that they need to achieve in their role. And if we had a grid like that, that's updated, every few weeks or monthly even, then our SDRs have a place, a repository of information that's current, where they can go read that, turn it into snippets. And, personalization at scale works on a persona-based and industry-based level. So while I still agree, I still think that if you've got your top level titles, like C-suite titles, deserve a little bit more time, a little bit of more effort. You might be able to find an interview where they're talking about their goals for the year, or reading through financials. That I still believe is a good level of expert knowledge to have if you're trying to get on the phone with that person, and the credibility that you can build behind your expertise in their business is really, really well supported by research like that before a call. When you're talking about scalability, persona-based is often enough to be more successful than not. That was a long sentence. Anyone have any input on that?
Here, I think this is kind of building on that, right? What you just talked about is not unlike what many marketers will go through to build nurture sequences, to say, anticipating what a persona may care about. Although I love the idea of that grid, keeping it up to date. I kind of want to borrow that. But I love the question about, is nurture more effective when done by SDRs or marketing, or is it both? I'll throw in a both option there. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's both. I would argue that there's a life cycle of a lead, as far as when we're being very strategically targeting with our SDRs effort, calling, emailing, LinkedIn messaging, social prospecting, that, we get to a point where it's like, okay, we've done our 8 to 12 touches on this. Now it's time to give them a little bit of a break. If we had a response that was a not right now, or if we never got a response, I would argue that then they should be added to a marketing nurture campaign for at least up to 3 months. Because you think about 3 months in terms of quarters and how much decisions change over a quarter and priorities shift over a quarter. And then I would put them back into a very focused, strategic, SDR driven cadence or sequence. So I think it works together, and those nurture sequences nurture campaigns are really important to making sure that we're staying top of mind in that 3-month period where we might not be contacting them strategically. We still don't want them picking up the phone and calling a competitor. We still want the brand awareness that, like, we're here when you're ready, so it's important.
And question from Tammy. Thanks, Tammy. That is, how do you manage the separation between marketing or SDRs? What have you seen, Lisa? Hi, Tammy.
Hello. So the separation, can you clarify a little bit on what you mean by separation? Oh, sorry, you're on mute.
Sorry. Yeah, so I think what we're struggling with right now is everybody's going in, the SDRs are trying so hard to get their meetings that they are going in to grab, they have access to the database. So we're trying to, get it to be, we're using intent data. So I'm trying to get it to where marketing is running the nurtures at the highest, the earlier stages, and then we're transitioning to SDRs, but it's like holding off the natives. I mean, they can't, they're waiting for us to, get to the point where they can touch them. And so it's kind of like the Wild West right now.
And are they working on a named account strategy, or is it geographic territories or verticals? Like, how are they
have, they aren't really super account based. So they're doing a hybrid of, they have their target accounts that they're reaching out to, and then they're managing inbound MQLs as well. And when they run short on MQLs, they're outbounding their target accounts, and they're pulling in contacts from Zoom and, anywhere else they get them. And so we're kind of trying to get our arms around some putting some rails around that, some structure.
Yeah, and I've dealt with this many times, and it's hard when SDRs are working towards hitting a goal, and they see an opportunity to have, to add somebody into a sequence. It's hard to say like, no, this is not a warm lead. Like we're waiting. These are in nurture sequences. Like I don't know if you're using lead scoring, but like this, if this is below the threshold and has not MQL'd, we're not putting this into sequence right now. So I mean, a part of that conversation, honestly, was me pointing out that the accountability behind our brand protection, really, like we can't be hitting a company from all angles. It looks sloppy. It looks, that's part of my CRM training. Always check the CRM, because we don't want like 4 people reaching out to the same contact for with the same messaging or the same ask. We want to make sure that it doesn't ever look like a prospect is on a list. Right. That's the whole reason we hire SDRs and not just machines. We want to be human. We want to be intentional. So maybe it's just a bit of a training session around, do you understand how this could harm our chances of winning this business by, like we look scattered. We don't look like we're organized. We don't look like we're doing an ABM strategy. We look like we're going rogue and super spamming the nation, which is really what needs to stop. And, we've had this conversation for years, but over the pandemic, the email communication increased so much because people weren't in the office that it started to become more ignored than ever. So it's one of those things where we need to be very strategic about how we use it, the message we put in it. And that's why like research and personalization plus, collaborating with marketing and what they're working on is really important.
Thanks. That's great.
Building on what you said there about COVID and kind of everybody going to the email channel, are you seeing any other trends there? And let me give you some color of a comment someone had mentioned where they said a lot of people are changing jobs right now, and SDRs are having even more of a challenging time of getting a hold of a buyer, and we're all working remotely. So that means really your cell phone is probably, other than email and LinkedIn, cell phone's the other way to get a hold of people, and Zoom has so-so cell phone numbers. But what are you seeing there in terms of COVID trends of SDR outreach? What's working, what's not working? Anything around those lines?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, I think it's shifted a little bit even during the last year and a half, because of course we were all, even remote. A lot of people were remote for the first time. And so that shift of like, okay, how do I make sure I can get calls from my office line and forwarding that and all, like even just the logistics around being able to work remotely. And then on top of that, the distraction, we were all like, mentally tired, and we weren't really, there was no visibility into the future. We couldn't make a decision on a new software or service because we didn't know if we were going to have a job in a month. Like it was so uncertain for that first like 3-4 months of COVID. Then it emerged that it was like, at that time, it was actually, I was working with it. I was leading an SDR team. I got to say, it was incredible. People picked up the phone more than ever. It was like we were connecting and people were interested in having conversations. Now, again, not a lot of conversions out of that because they were like, I do not feel like I'm in a position to make a decision right now. But a lot of initial connections, rapport building, empathy, and there was a contact strategy just built off the fact that we had a good conversation where we tried to understand what was prevalent in their business, top of mind during COVID. What are they focusing on? Getting to the true business issues that they face. And then building that trust and rapport to continue that conversation. So often 6 months down the road, once businesses were starting to click into the gear of, oh, wait, we need to keep running. We need to keep going in order to keep people employed. We need to, it was this shift of like, okay, wait, we have to work. We have to continue to push and find a way to do business together because our economy relies on it, and our people rely on their income and everything else. So then there was this uptick of, okay, we're going to figure this out. Like, okay, we're all strapped for resources. Can we get more creative about negotiation of like payment terms and things like that, so that the cash flow wasn't as affected? You saw people making more creative deals happen that way. And the SDR teams, that's, I think, where the email really was a huge uptick, was sort of like 6 months after we all kind of shut down and then started working from home. And then it was just like people were drowning in their emails. They were ignoring their inboxes. The response rates just dropped like a stone. Yes, it's challenging to get cell phone numbers. I saw more and more companies emerge. Like I had never heard of Lucia until this last year, and they're specializing in finding cell phone numbers for people. And a lot of companies are using them and other data providers to try to get around the fact that that cell phone data is often very inconsistent, we'll say. But it's also, I think the biggest success strategy is use every medium available to you. Don't just focus on phone and email. LinkedIn is huge. Social prospecting is huge. I do a social prospecting training with teams that I work with. And we talk a lot about how you can learn so much by looking at the content that people share. And whether that's LinkedIn or even Twitter, a lot of people still share their Twitter handles. You can really get to the heart of what's top of mind for them based on the content that they're sharing. Content sharing is such a strong signal. I think we discount it quite a bit, but if you're opting to share something, you are paying attention to it, which in this world of headlines and everything bombarding us constantly, if I choose one thing to share out of a haystack, it means a little more to me than, just, oh, my company told me to share this. If it's something that's not company content, especially, it's like, okay, this hits home. And I found that showed up a lot with this year with the social issues that we saw emerge, was that people who really shared, supporting women, supporting Black employers, or, things like that, all of that just, I don't know, opened up a whole world into understanding our, oh no, did I freeze?
You did for a sec, but you were back.
I'll just pick up on what Lisa was saying. Like something really struck me when she was talking about the intent, I think, around as a strong signal around sharing social. And I don't know about other people. I'm really curious. Like I've not had good results with intent. I feel like it's often exaggerated, and the SDRs, they're not pursuing those intent signals. They're not seeing value. I've even worked on some intent programs that are showing intent, supposedly reporting intent at the contact level as opposed to the company level, and they're not converting. And I don't know if there's a better way to get an intent, but Lisa, what you just mentioned about the content sharing makes a lot of sense.
So I think it's layers, right? There's actually a great podcast. One of my clients, growth marketers, was on where she talks about all the different layers that they use at their company. And it's the intent data is just one of the layers in the lasagna, right? It's a noodle. So when you pair that with the content sharing, and I think it's just part of proper research. And like SDR teams, we were just talking about this quote behind me before we hit go on the webinar. Being curious, genuine curiosity. Like I don't know if everybody can read it. It says, "Be curious, not judgmental." It's Walt Whitman. And being truly, genuinely curious. Like how is this person I'm about to spend my time contacting living their life? What's happening with them? What are they responsible for? What can we perceive as issues or problems they might be having? And actually trying to understand at a human level. Again, going back to, we're trying to inject humanity and empathy back into sales. And I think that was one of the best things that came out of this last year, is that we all had the same issue, in a global pandemic. It didn't matter if you were global sales, like didn't matter. Everyone you spoke to was experiencing the same thing. And it leveled us all to a truly human level. And it starting that conversation with, and how are you doing? And being genuine about it was, a game changer in starting cold calling, and how's your business handling it? What decisions have you made? And actually caring what the answer was, and using that to not just, like, I always say when I'm teaching people about cold calling techniques, don't go in with the intention you're going to book a meeting. Go in with the intention of gathering information. And if you gather more information on that call, you're winning. So that's another step in your journey with this prospect. And whether it's a deal in 2 months or a deal a year from now, if you're genuinely curious and empathetic and you care about their business and you listen to what they need, then they're going to call you. And if you stay top of mind, they'll call you. And I've seen it happen over and over and over again. Companies saying, we're working on it. We're not there yet. We're not there yet. And then out of the blue comes the call. Hey, are you still with this company? Because we're ready now. Yeah. So yeah, it's really important to continue to nurture those relationships. And that intent data, to your point, Linda, it's an indicator, but it doesn't mean, hey, I'm ready to buy tomorrow. I'm doing research. I got to build on that. Right. And maybe that's the shift that we have to have in those conversations is, you're researching this right now. Can I ask why it's top of mind? Mm-hmm. And, then it becomes a conversation of, okay, well, if you have a business issue you're looking to solve in a time-bound, quantifiable way, perhaps we can work together on how our solution can help you get there. So I know we're like 2 minutes away, but
we can talk about this for hours. For
I know. I was actually thinking, because the way we promoted this, we wanted to talk a bit about personalization, and I think we covered it a little bit, but I wanted to just kind of point out the fact that we talk about personalization as a strategy, as a tactic, when actually I think going a level deeper into why we actually want to personalize. The SDRs, to John's point, I don't know if we were recording at that point, but he said something about it being one of the hardest jobs. And a lot of people agree that it is. It's one of the hardest jobs out there. But something that I think gets lost in, and I've worked really hard in organizations to build up, is like the internal respect for the SDR team, like their actual brand image almost within the company, because oftentimes they're young teams. They're kind of seen as like the cowboys, they're having fun. They're going out for beers. They're young, they're fun, they're energetic. And so I don't know, this like lack, it's not like a total lack of respect, but I don't think they realize how respected they are as revenue generators, how much they affect the actual bottom line of the company. And having worked in a lot of startups, when I was hiring SDRs, I'd often promote it that way. Like, what company are you going to go to that has 40,000 employees where you can actually impact the bottom line of their revenue? Do you want to be 1% of 30 people, or do you want to be 1% of 45,000? And the impact that you can have as a good SDR, if you really take pride in being good at that role, a master at your craft, you will never want for job ever. And you will be highly, highly respected, not to mention much more successful in your future roles should go whichever way you decide to go.
Well, that seems like a pretty perfect note to end on. And I love your quote. I think everybody